The cooler didn't make a sound, and that silence was about to cost somebody $42,000. At 4:43 that morning, I pushed open the stainless steel door to my milk room with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and immediately stopped. Something was wrong. Dairy farms are never quiet before sunrise. Vacuum pumps pulse. Water lines hiss. Motors vibrate through concrete. My $14,000 bulk milk cooler had its own steady mechanical hum, a sound I'd heard so many thousands of times that I normally didn't notice it. That morning, I noticed because it was gone. Completely. The room smelled like chlorine sanitizer, warm concrete, and fresh milk from the first milking. Outside, 87 Holsteins shifted in their stalls while August crickets buzzed beyond the barn. Inside, all I could hear was the fluorescent light above me and the soft scrape of my boots. I set my coffee down and walked straight to the cooler. The stainless steel felt wrong beneath my palm. Not warm yet, but not reassuringly cold either. I checked the temperature display, then checked it again because sometimes your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are telling it. The refrigeration system was dead. I looked at my watch. 4:44. That turned the problem into a clock. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 43 years old, and my family has been milking cows on this Wisconsin ground since my grandfather bought the first 60 acres in 1968. I know what equipment sounds like when a bearing fails. I know the burnt smell of a motor winding that's cooked itself. I know the sharp click of an overloaded breaker. This wasn't any of those things. There had been no warning, no burning insulation, no compressor struggling through its last few cycles. The electricity had simply disappeared. I crossed the room and opened the electrical panel. My flashlight beam moved over the breakers. Nothing obvious had tripped. That's when the first cold knot formed in my stomach. I grabbed my phone and called our emergency electrician, Mark Delaney. Milk cooler, I told him. No power. Breakers look normal. He didn't waste words. I'm coming. I stepped outside into the blue-black Wisconsin morning. Dew soaked the edges of my work boots. The air carried that familiar mixture of hay, diesel, and manure that people from the new Silver Pines subdivision liked to call unpleasant until they remembered their expensive houses had been built beside a working dairy farm. Then my flashlight swept toward the service equipment near the property line. I stopped. Yesterday, that disconnect had been sealed and untouched. Now something about it looked different. Fresh marks showed against the weathered metal, bright silver where there should have been years of gray oxidation. I moved closer. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. 3 days earlier, HOA President Vanessa Whitmore had stood beside this exact equipment, white SUV idling behind her, and told me she'd find out who really controlled it. I had assumed that was another threat from a woman who thought a clipboard could rewrite property lines. Standing there at 4:47 a.m., with thousands of dollars of milk slowly warming behind me, I wasn't assuming anything anymore. Then my phone buzzed. An email notification filled the screen. Sender, Silver Pines Estates HOA. Subject, electrical safety correction completed. I read those 4 words twice. Then I looked back toward the silent milk room. Vanessa thought she'd solved an eyesore before breakfast. What she didn't know was that she'd just started the most expensive electrical lesson her HOA had ever paid for. Mark was still 20 minutes away when I stood beside that disconnect staring at the email on my phone. And those 20 minutes gave me plenty of time to remember how a dairy farm that had survived 3 generations had somehow become a problem for people who arrived 3 years ago. My grandfather, Walter Cole, bought this place in 1968 with 60 acres, 24 cows, and a used tractor that leaked enough oil to mark everywhere it had been. My father added another 42 acres in the 1990s, expanded the barn, and installed the first real bulk cooling system. By the time the farm became mine, we were working 102 acres and milking 87 Holsteins twice a day. Nothing about it was glamorous. My morning started. Before 5, my shirts usually smelled like hay before breakfast. There was always something needing grease, adjustment, cleaning, or replacement. But every fence post, every water line, and every scar in the concrete represented work my family had actually done. For most of my life, the land east of US was soybean field. Then a development company bought it. Survey flags appeared first, then bulldozers, then streets with names like Whispering Pine Lane and Sterling Ridge Court, names that sounded like they belonged in a brochure because they did. Within 18 months, Silver Pines Estates had 46 houses lined up behind decorative stone entrances. During the first summer, people seemed delighted to live beside a farm. Parents brought children to the fence to watch the cows. Neighbors waved when I drove the tractor down our lane. One man even told me the farm gave the neighborhood authentic country character. That lasted until authentic country character started making authentic country noise. A milk tanker arriving before sunrise became a complaint. Tractor headlights became light pollution. The smell after spreading manure became an environmental concern. Even the backup alarm on my skid steer generated an email about excessive commercial activity. Then Vanessa Whitmore became president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. I first met her on a warm May afternoon when she walked onto my gravel lane carrying a leather folder. She was 51, always perfectly dressed, and drove a white sport utility vehicle polished so clean that my barn reflected in the doors. Her perfume reached me before her handshake did. She introduced herself as though I should already know who she was. Then she handed me a list of concerns. My exterior lighting was too bright. My equipment was visible from 3 homes. My milk truck arrived during quiet hours. I read the page once and handed it back. Vanessa, this farm is not part of Silver Pines. Her smile barely moved. Your property affects Silver Pines. That is different. She looked past me toward the barn instead of answering. That became our pattern. Every few weeks another complaint arrived. I kept everyone in. A blue binder in my office, mostly because my father had taught me never to throw away paperwork involving land, taxes, utilities, or neighbors. Then Vanessa noticed the electrical service equipment near our eastern boundary. One afternoon, I found her standing beside it, studying the metal enclosure like she had discovered something offensive growing from the ground. That box has to go, she said. I told her it served agricultural equipment and had been there long before Silver Pines existed. She rested 2 fingers against the enclosure and gave me that same controlled smile. Then we will find out who actually controls it. At the time, I thought she was bluffing. Now the cooler behind me was silent. Her email was glowing on my phone, and Mark Delaney's headlights had just appeared at the end of my lane. Mark Delaney parked beside the milk house at 5:06 that morning, stepped out with a flashlight and a canvas tool bag, and took one look at my face before skipping the small talk. Mark had handled electrical work on our farm for 11 years. He knew the difference between a nuisance outage and a problem that could erase a day of income before most people finished breakfast. I showed him the cooler first. He checked the panel, tested the circuit, then followed the service toward the eastern side of the property. His boots scraped across the gravel while I walked behind him with Vanessa's email still open on my phone. At the disconnect, he stopped. Who worked on this? He asked. Apparently Silver Pines. Mark turned slowly. They had an electrician touch your agricultural service? I handed him the phone. He read the message without speaking. Then he crouched beside the enclosure and aimed his flashlight along the conduit. Do not touch anything, he said. That sentence changed the temperature of the morning more than the dead cooler had. Mark started taking photographs. Connection points. Identification labels. Fresh tool marks. The utility tag. He photographed everything before opening his meter case. I had learned years ago that when a professional stops trying to fix something and starts documenting it, the problem has moved into a different category. While he worked, I remembered the afternoon Vanessa first decided that electrical equipment was her next neighborhood improvement project. It had been 3 weeks earlier, just after 4 in the afternoon. I was rinsing mud from the tires of my skid steer when her white sport utility vehicle rolled onto my lane. She stepped out holding a folder stamped Silver Pines Architectural Committee. We have received multiple complaints, she said. About what? She pointed toward the service equipment near the boundary. That installation. I actually looked behind me because I thought she meant something else. The enclosure was plain gray metal, partly screened by cedar trees, at least 60 feet from the nearest Silver Pines house. It supplies the farm. It is visible from our walking trail. So are my cows. She did not appreciate that. Vanessa opened her folder and showed me a printed photograph taken from inside the subdivision. Someone had circled the enclosure in red ink. Underneath were the words non-conforming utility infrastructure. I told her again that Silver Pines rules ended at the property line. She responded with a phrase she had clearly practiced. Community safety does not stop at arbitrary boundaries. That was when I started paying closer attention. 2 days later, I received a letter demanding documentation for the electrical service. Then another requesting inspection records. Then an email claiming the equipment might interfere with planned landscaping near the subdivision entrance. I answered every message politely. I sent nothing they were not legally entitled to receive, and I saved every exchange in that blue binder. Vanessa became more aggressive each time I refused to treat her homeowners association like a government agency. The final conversation happened beside the disconnect itself. She touched the enclosure and told me they would determine who controlled it. I told her, before you authorize anything on this side of the line, check the records. She smiled. Everything connected to this community eventually becomes our responsibility. Back in the present, Mark stood up and brushed dust from his work pants. The first sunlight was beginning to turn the barn roof orange. Ethan, he said, this was not an equipment failure. He pointed his flashlight toward the altered service connection. Somebody deliberately authorized work here. My phone buzzed again before I could answer. Another message from Silver Pines had arrived. This one included the name of the contractor Vanessa had hired. The contractor listed in Vanessa's message was North Ridge Property Services, a company I recognized immediately because I had seen one of their trucks inside Silver Pines 2 days earlier. At the time, I had been loading feed near the eastern fence when a white utility pickup stopped beside the subdivision walking trail. 2 men stepped out, photographed the service equipment, and left before I could reach them. Now I knew why. Mark read the contractor name and shook his head. They do landscaping, lighting, entrance signs, basic property maintenance. They should not be making decisions about a farm service. I opened the attachment beneath Vanessa's email. The work description was short. Remove unauthorized electrical connection affecting community utility corridor. Authorized by Vanessa Whitmore, President, Silver Pines Estates Homeowners Association. There it was. Her name. Her authorization. Her words. I took a screenshot, forwarded the entire message to my personal archive, then printed nothing because the milk behind us was still getting warmer. Mark called the electric utility while I checked the cooler temperature again. Every minute suddenly had weight. The stainless steel tank held the result of hours of work, and refrigeration does not care about neighborhood politics. It only cares whether electricity reaches the compressor. While Mark waited for the utility dispatcher, I opened my blue binder on the hood of his truck. The paper edges fluttered in the morning breeze. 3 months of letters told the story better than I ever could. First came the noise complaints, then lighting, then equipment visibility. Vanessa had tried each issue separately, and every time I answered with the same fact. Cole Dairy Farm was private agricultural property outside Silver Pines. When those complaints went nowhere, she changed vocabulary. Appearance became safety. Safety became infrastructure. Infrastructure became authority. One letter claimed the Homeowners Association had a responsibility to address hazardous utility conditions adjacent to common property. Another demanded that I relocate visible service equipment within 30 days. I had replied with the county parcel map and told Vanessa that no Silver Pines covenant applied to my acreage. Her answer arrived 9 minutes later. We disagree with your interpretation. I remembered staring at those words in my office while the old wall clock clicked above my father's filing cabinet. You cannot disagree a property line into moving, but Vanessa seemed determined to try. A week later, she sent what she called a final compliance notice. I responded once. Do not enter my property or authorize work on privately owned farm infrastructure without written legal authority. I saved the sent email. Thursday at 3:18 in the afternoon. That timestamp had seemed unimportant until now. Mark leaned over the binder. You warned her in writing? Twice. He looked toward the silent milk room. Keep that. At 5:31, the utility dispatcher called back. Mark put the phone on speaker. The representative confirmed there had been no scheduled utility outage at my address, no emergency shutoff, and no utility crew dispatched overnight. Then she said something that made both of us stop moving. Their system showed a contractor inquiry from the previous afternoon regarding service identification near the Silver Pines boundary. The utility had not authorized disconnection of my farm equipment. I wrote the time down beside her name. At 5:36, another vehicle rolled onto my gravel lane. White sport utility vehicle, clean enough to reflect the sunrise. Vanessa stepped out holding her phone and wearing the calm expression of someone arriving to inspect a job she believed was finished. She glanced toward Mark, then toward the open binder on his truck. Good morning, Ethan, she said. I assume you received our notice. I closed the binder slowly. I did. She nodded toward the dead equipment. Then you understand why the correction was necessary. Mark looked at me, but I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply held up my phone. Vanessa, are you saying Silver Pines authorized this work? Her answer came without hesitation. Of course we did. I unlocked the screen. Can you send me that in writing? Vanessa looked at me for half a second, then gave the smallest shrug. Certainly. Her thumbs moved across her phone. 10 seconds later, mine buzzed. I opened the message while she was still standing there. Silver Pines Estates authorized North Ridge Property Services to correct the electrical condition adjacent to community property. The work was performed under my direction as association president. Vanessa Whitmore. I read it once, saved a copy, and forwarded it to my archive. Mark watched me do it without saying a word. Vanessa mistook our silence for surrender. Now that this has been addressed, I expect the remaining equipment will be relocated promptly. I glanced toward the milk room. My cooler has no power. Then call your electrician. Mark actually lowered his coffee at that. I am his electrician. Vanessa looked at his work shirt, then back at me. Then I suppose you can fix it. That was the moment I understood how little she knew about what she had authorized. To her, electricity was a switch. Off, on, problem solved. On a working dairy farm, power is refrigeration, pumps, ventilation, hot water, sanitation, and timing. You do not casually interrupt one part of that system and assume everything downstream waits politely for you to change your mind. I checked the cooler again. The temperature was climbing. Slowly, but enough. Mark called another electrician from his company and asked him to bring temporary equipment while he contacted the county electrical inspector. I called our milk hauler and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me to document temperatures and hold the load until we knew whether refrigeration could be restored safely. My breakfast coffee sat untouched on the truck hood, cold now, while the milk I needed cold was moving the other direction. Vanessa finally seemed irritated by the activity. This is becoming unnecessarily dramatic. I looked at her. You disconnected equipment you do not own. We corrected a safety issue. According to whom? She lifted her chin. Our contractor. Mark closed his meter case. Was that contractor acting under a permit? Vanessa paused. It was tiny, maybe 1 second, but I saw it. You would need to ask them. Mark nodded. I will. She turned toward her vehicle. Before she left, she told me the association would not accept responsibility for what she called obsolete farm infrastructure. I did not answer. I already had the answer she had sent me in writing. At 6:12, Mark's second truck arrived. At 6:24, the county inspector returned his call. By 6:40, the gravel beside my milk room looked like a temporary electrical command post. Tool cases sat open. Extension equipment was being evaluated. Photographs were time-stamped. Every connection was documented before anyone changed it. Then Mark called me over. He had traced the affected service and found something worse than a simple disconnected feed. Ethan, I cannot just reconnect this and walk away. He pointed toward the service route. Once they altered this section, restoring it properly triggers inspection of the affected installation. We need the utility involved, and we may need to replace more than what they touched. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. How much more? I do not know yet. Behind us, the cooler remained silent. At 6:47, the temperature display climbed another degree. I looked down at Vanessa's written authorization glowing on my phone. She thought she had forced me to pay for a quick repair. Instead, she had just documented exactly who started an emergency job that was getting larger by the minute. By 7:05, the county electrical inspector had seen Mark's photographs and told us the same thing Mark already suspected. Do not simply reconnect the altered service and pretend nothing happened. The morning sun was climbing over Silver Pines, turning their identical windows gold, while my milk room stayed unnaturally quiet. Mark spread a service diagram across the hood of his truck and traced the route with one finger. This section was modified here, he said. That means we have to establish exactly what was changed, verify the grounding and protection, coordinate with the utility, and get the affected work inspected before I put your refrigeration load back on it permanently. I stared at the diagram. So what is the fastest safe option? Temporary power for the critical equipment first. Permanent correction after we document everything. That answer mattered. I was not looking for revenge. I wanted cold milk and a working farm. Mark's crew began setting up an approved temporary supply while I logged cooler temperatures every 15 minutes. The numbers climbed across my notebook in neat black ink. At 7:18, the utility representative arrived in a blue service truck. Her name was Rachel Monroe, and she moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent years around people discovering that electricity does not care about arguments. She checked the service identification, compared it with utility records, then asked who had authorized the previous work. I handed her Vanessa's email. Rachel read it, looked toward Silver Pines, and asked, "Is your farm part of that association?" "No." "Was the association authorized by you to modify this service?" "No." She wrote something on her tablet. That tiny tapping sound felt louder than it should have. By 8:02, the temporary plan was approved. When the cooler finally came back to life, the compressor started with a deep mechanical rumble that I felt through the soles of my boots. I stood there listening like it was music. But temporary power only stopped the clock. It did not erase the damage. Mark spent the next 2 hours tracing the affected route with Rachel and the inspector. Around 10:30, he came into my office carrying a yellow legal pad covered with numbers. "I have bad news." I leaned back in my chair. "How bad?" "The old configuration cannot just be restored piece by piece under this emergency correction. The affected service needs a compliant rebuild through this section. New disconnect equipment, new conduit run, grounding work, trenching, utility coordination, inspection, labor, temporary service, and restoration." He slid the pad toward me. The first rough estimate was $18,600. I stared at it. For something that worked yesterday. For something somebody changed yesterday. That distinction stayed with me. By noon, another contractor had arrived to price excavation. The route crossed compacted gravel and a section near the farm entrance that had to remain accessible for the milk tanker. Scheduling it as emergency work pushed labor costs higher. The utility required additional coordination. The inspector required documentation before concealment. Nobody was padding anything. Nobody was adding luxury upgrades. Every new line on the estimate existed because the safe repair had to be done correctly and quickly. 18,000 became 24,000, then 31. By late afternoon, with site restoration and emergency labor included, Mark placed the revised worksheet on my desk. $42,000. I could smell warm paper from the printer and diesel drifting through the open office window. My phone buzzed before I could speak. Vanessa had sent another email. "Silver Pines Estates will not reimburse expenses resulting from your decision to maintain non-conforming infrastructure." I looked at her message, then at her earlier written authorization, then at the growing stack of inspection records beside my blue binder. For the first time all day, I smiled. That smile was not because $42,000 was funny. It was because Vanessa had finally put both halves of my case in writing. First, she confirmed that Silver Pines authorized the work. Then she confirmed that Silver Pines intended to deny responsibility for the consequences. I printed both emails and placed them side by side on my desk. Same sender. Same association signature. Same president. 2 messages separated by less than 12 hours. And together they told the story better than any argument I could make. The next morning, Mark returned with the final emergency work package. Rachel Monroe sent the utility activity record showing there had been no utility-authorized shutdown. The county inspector provided his field notes documenting the altered service and the requirements for restoration. Northridge Property Services became the last missing piece. Their manager, Daniel Foster, called me shortly after 9. His voice sounded careful. "Mr. Cole, I understand there is a dispute about yesterday's work. There is documentation about yesterday's work." Silence. Then he asked what I had. I told him about Vanessa's written authorization, the utility record, the photographs, and the inspection. Another pause. "We were told that equipment served common association property. It serves my dairy farm." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I need to review our work order." 40 minutes later, he emailed it to me. Vanessa's name appeared at the bottom under Authorized Representative. The description referred to removal of an unauthorized agricultural electrical connection near the Silver Pines boundary. I printed that too. My blue binder was getting thick enough to make the desk drawer stick. By Friday, the permanent rewire was underway. Fresh conduit arrived on a flatbed. The excavation crew opened the approved route beside the gravel lane. Mark's electricians installed the new service equipment while the temporary setup kept the cooler running. Every morning, I walked into the milk room and listened for that compressor before doing anything else. That hum had become reassurance measured in horsepower. The final invoices came in piece by piece. Electrical labor and equipment, excavation, temporary service, utility coordination, inspection costs, gravel restoration, emergency scheduling. The total settled at $42,000. I sent everything to my attorney, Laura Bennett, along with the blue binder. Laura had handled a boundary easement for my father years earlier, and she had the useful habit of becoming quieter when something interested her. She read Vanessa's emails first, then the contractor authorization, then the utility record. "Did you ever give Silver Pines permission to control this equipment?" she asked. "Never." "Is your parcel subject to their covenants?" "No." She nodded and turned another page. "Good. Then we do not need to make this complicated." Her letter went out that afternoon. It requested reimbursement for documented emergency restoration costs and preservation of all Silver Pines. Records related to Vanessa's authorization. The association had 10 business days to respond. They answered in 3. Vanessa denied personally directing the disconnection. Laura forwarded me the response without comment. I opened my binder, found Vanessa's message from that morning, and read the sentence again. The work was performed under my direction as association president. Then I checked the calendar. The monthly Silver Pines board meeting was Thursday night. For months, Vanessa had used letters, notices, and official language to make herself sound untouchable. Thursday, every document she had created was going back into the room with her. Thursday night, I carried one binder into the Silver Pines clubhouse and watched Vanessa arrive with 3 folders of her own. The room smelled like fresh coffee, carpet cleaner, and the lemon furniture polish somebody had used on the long meeting table. About 30 homeowners filled the folding chairs along the wall. Most had probably come expecting another argument about landscaping or parking. Laura Bennett sat beside me without saying much. Vanessa took her usual seat at the center of the board table, adjusted the microphone, and opened the meeting with the same polished confidence she had used on my gravel laying. My issue came 23 minutes later. Vanessa introduced it as an ongoing dispute involving unsafe agricultural infrastructure adjacent to association property. I let her talk. She said Silver Pines had acted after repeated safety concerns. She said the contractor had been hired for routine corrective work. Then she said something interesting. At no point did I personally instruct anyone to interrupt Mr. Cole's farm operations. Laura wrote 6 words on her legal pad and slid it toward me. Let her finish. So I did. Vanessa explained that I had chosen an unnecessarily expensive repair and was now attempting to transfer private farm costs onto homeowners. A few people shifted in their chairs when she mentioned $42,000. When she finished, the board treasurer, Michael Reeves, looked at me. "Mr. Cole, do you have documentation supporting your claim?" I placed the blue binder on the table. The sound was soft, just cardboard and paper against polished wood, but the room went quiet. Laura opened to the first tab, County Parcel Map. Second tab, my written warning that Silver Pines had no permission to authorize work on my property. Third tab, Utility Record showing no utility approved shutdown. Fourth tab, Inspector Notes. Fifth tab, North Ridge Work Order. Vanessa's name sat at the bottom under Authorized Representative. Michael leaned forward. Vanessa immediately said the contractor had misunderstood the scope. Laura turned one page. "Then perhaps this will clarify the scope." She read Vanessa's email confirming that Silver Pines authorized the correction and that the work had been performed under her direction as association president. Nobody interrupted. Vanessa's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Her jaw tightened. Michael asked for the date and time. 5:37 that morning, I said. Laura placed the next email beside it. Vanessa's later denial of responsibility. Then she placed the association's formal response beside Vanessa's written authorization. 3 versions of the same event, all carrying Silver Pines letterhead. The board secretary asked whether the association attorney had reviewed the original work order before North Ridge was hired. Vanessa did not answer immediately. That pause told the room more than I could. Michael removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Vanessa, did the board vote to authorize work on Mr. Cole's electrical service?" Silence again. "Finally," she said, "I believed emergency authority applied." Laura calmly asked her to identify the emergency that existed before the contractor arrived. Vanessa looked down at her papers. Nobody had reported an outage. Nobody had reported a fire. Nobody from the utility had declared a hazard. The only documented problem before the work was Vanessa's complaint that the equipment was visible from the walking trail. Michael requested a closed-board discussion and announced that Vanessa would no longer handle the matter on behalf of Silver Pines. 2 weeks later, the association's insurer and attorneys agreed to resolve the documented restoration costs rather than continue the dispute. Vanessa resigned as president shortly afterward. Before I left that meeting, she passed me near the clubhouse door without looking at the binder under my arm. I remembered what she had told me beside the disconnect weeks earlier. Everything connected to this community eventually becomes our responsibility. She had finally been right about something. 3 weeks later, I walked into the milk room at 4:43 in the morning and stopped in almost the exact place where this whole mess had started. The stainless steel walls caught the pale glow from the overhead lights. Chlorine sanitizer hung faintly in the air. Outside, the Holsteins shifted against their gates while a tractor idled near the feed lane. Everything looked ordinary again, which was exactly what I wanted. Then I heard it, the low, steady hum of the cooler compressor. I rested my hand against the stainless steel and felt that familiar vibration beneath my palm. The temperature display held exactly where it should. Cold milk. Stable power. No temporary cables. No emergency equipment. No contractors parked along my gravel lane. Mark's permanent installation had passed final inspection. The utility had completed its documentation, and the disturbed section near the entrance had been restored so cleanly that you would never know how much paperwork had once been spread across that ground. The $42,000 in documented restoration costs had been resolved through the association's insurer, and my attorney made sure the agreement included something I cared about even more than the money. Silver Pines formally acknowledged that my farm was outside its covenants, and that the association had no authority to enter my property or direct work on my private agricultural infrastructure. I framed that page, not because it was pretty. It was mostly legal language printed on white paper. But my grandfather had taught my father, and my father had taught me, that a boundary only protects you when people respect it or when you are prepared to prove where it is. Vanessa's resignation became official at the next board meeting. Michael Reeves temporarily took over as president, and the first conversation we had lasted less than 5 minutes. He came to the farm, stayed on the public side of the fence until I invited him through, and apologized for what happened. That small gesture told me Silver Pines had learned more than Vanessa ever had. The complaints stopped. No more letters about tractor lights. No more demands about milk trucks arriving before sunrise. No more photographs of my equipment with red circles drawn around it. The subdivision was still there, of course. 46 houses still caught the morning sun beyond my eastern field. Children still walked the trail. Dogs still barked at the cows. The farm still smelled like a farm. Nothing needed to disappear for the problem to end. People simply needed to understand where their authority stopped. I kept the blue binder in my office after everything was settled. It barely fit on the shelf anymore. Every complaint, photograph, email, inspection note, utility record, contractor order, and invoice remained inside. The page I remembered most was not the largest invoice. It was Vanessa's short message saying the work had been performed under her direction. She had spent months trying to make official-looking paperwork into a weapon. In the end, her own paperwork became the thing she could not argue with. I poured fresh coffee into my old steel mug and stepped outside as sunrise spread orange across the Wisconsin fields. A milk tanker turned onto the lane right on schedule. Gravel crunched beneath its tires. Behind me, the cooler kept humming. Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. Justice did not sound like a courtroom speech that morning. It sounded like a compressor running steadily in the dark, doing exactly what it had always been meant to do. Thank you for watching this story. If Ethan Cole's patience, careful preparation, and determination to let the evidence speak for itself inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who enjoy compelling legal dramas and stories where facts overcome arrogance, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable HOA conflicts, property rights battles, and real life justice stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story about crossed boundaries, overlooked records, and ordinary people who quietly protect what generations before them worked so hard to build. Your support helps us continue bringing these remarkable stories to life, and we cannot wait to share the next one with you. That if you were in Ethan Cole's position, would you have demanded immediate compensation from the HOA? Or would you have stayed calm, documented everything, and let their own paperwork prove who was responsible? Tell us your choice in the comments and explain why.